It's incredible. You have to have blinkers on as a CEO, right? No matter what the challenge is, you have to have the ability to sort of power through and stay positive and see that light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how small it is, to be able to drive through.
Welcome to the Leadership and Legacy podcast, where we interview inspiring CEOs, entrepreneurs, and software leaders who are building remarkable companies and legacies in the world. I'm your host, Austin Yoder, founder of Magrathea Partners, an entrepreneurial investment firm dedicated to acquiring and growing one great founder-owned software company. As part of my journey, I'm learning from inspiring leaders and builders and gathering the most valuable insights and advice I learn along the way here with you, my wonderful audience, so that we can all learn and lead better together. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you'll find as much value and insight in the show as I do. Welcome back to the Leadership and Legacy podcast. Today, in the new year 2024, we have the deep honor of being joined by Mark McKenzie, CEO of Kivuto. Kivuto is a digital asset management and distribution company for academic institutions. And I'm going to just set the stage by introducing Mark a little bit for our audience, share a little bit about Kivuto, and then we're going to dive into some fascinating questions. Mark sold Kivuto in February of 2023 in an innovative first of its kind transaction in Canada. Mark remains operating CEO today while they seek a world-class replacement CEO. Mark is an operating partner at Relay Investments, a deeply respected institutional investor which invests in founder-owned companies globally through the search fund model. Mark has been working in and around the search fund community for 15 plus years. He serves on the board at multiple companies at Relay and is joining two more boards coming up here in Q1. Prior to joining Kivuto as CEO, Mark's experience was primarily in venture-funded startups. He continues to be an active investor and mentor to VC-backed companies and entrepreneurs. And just a little bit of background on Kivuto. As I mentioned, it is a digital asset management company for academic institutions. Kivuto has been called the Amazon of the academic world for higher education. Kivuto has been around for 25 years, serves a tremendous footprint in the academic world, serving more than 29,000 schools in 180 countries, 200 plus ISVs, independent software vendors, whose academic software products Kivuto helps distribute into the academic world, over 80 publishing houses serving 100,000 digital textbooks into schools. And in the world of higher ed, there are around 200 million students total. Kivuto serves a very large portion of these. So as you can see, Mark's personal portfolio is substantial and keeps him quite busy. A fun fact that I just learned is he's also an avid soccer player. So he's not only business. He's not all business. There's some fun and sport mixed in there too. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined by Mark today in our first episode of 2024. Mark, thank you so much for your time and for being with us today.
Thanks, Austin. That's a very nice introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome to 2024.
It is a happy new year to get to spend some time with you here today, Mark. Just for our audience to learn a little bit more, Mark, how many years have you been the CEO at Kivuto now?
I took over formally as the CEO back in, I think it was February of 2020. So I think a little over 3 years now, or close to 3 years. I was acting behind the scenes a little bit in the months prior to that. So I'd say, a little over 3 years at this point.
And you've been in and around EdTech for a number of years. How do you say EdTech has changed since you became the CEO at Kivuto? And how do you see EdTech evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question. EdTech is a massive market. I think 2023, approximately $270 billion market globally, growing at a CAGR of 16%. Year over year. So it's a massive market. There are an enormous number of EdTech companies going after that marketplace. And, if I think about education in general, certainly over the last decade and during the lockdown period of the COVID years, this really accelerated. I think digital disruption is kind of the order of the day for education. So what does that mean? It means traditional schools have to kind of rethink how they deliver education to students. During that lockdown time, the industry was massively affected. Education was one of the industries that really got deeply impacted by that. All the schools shut down. Kids couldn't go to the campuses to learn. And so distance learning, digital enabled distance learning became a very important way for schools to continue to operate. And so I think that really accelerated the thinking around the adoption of digital tech, and that continues today. And so, you have the traditional schools rethinking how they deliver education. And now you have the emergence in the last few years of new ways of delivering education. You have massive online open communities. You have digital learning platforms. You talked about Kivuto serving 80 publishing houses today. Publishing houses, all the big ones, and there's a long tail of publishers that deliver digital textbooks to students now, frequently delivering digital versions of those textbooks. But actually, if I look at the publishing houses, they're kind of scrambling as they're being disrupted to become more of a software company and think about how do they really embrace the digital transformation that's happening to them. And so traditional publishing houses hiring hundreds of software developers and starting to look more like software companies. So it's a fascinating time. This is going to continue. Certainly AI presents huge opportunities for education, but of course, huge challenges. If I give an assignment to a student today and ask them to write an essay, who's writing the essay, right? Is it the student or is it our good friend ChatGPT? And how does the professor know? And so there's a huge benefit to the digital disruption of education, but there's also challenges and risks as well.
It'll be certainly a fascinating next 5 to 10 years. Amazing. And Mark, what challenge are you the most proud of overcoming as you've led Kivuto these last years?
Yeah, I would say, getting the company to the point where we were able to transition it through a sale process into the hands of Valsoft. Kivuto is now owned by a company called Valsoft, which is one of the fastest growing software conglomerates in North America. I think top 15 in North America, number one in Canada for the last few years. So we are one of what is now a very large portfolio of software companies under the Valsoft umbrella. And actually post that acquisition in February, it's been a brilliant time for Kivuto. But maybe a little bit of context and history. So Kivuto, as you said, has been around for a very long time, 25 years. Still a relatively small company, but punching way above its weight in terms of penetration into the academic industry, especially higher ed. Just a substantial footprint in higher ed. Kivuto is very well known amongst IT departments in schools, people that own the school libraries. And the students would know us via a brand called On the Hub. Kivuto has a portal called On the Hub, which is, you mentioned, the Amazon of the academic industry. That's where students can go and get access to discounted versions of software and digital textbooks. The original business was built around the management and distribution of digital assets, primarily academic software, on the behalf of very large software vendors like Microsoft, Adobe, VMware. That was the legacy business. And it was really a program where those vendors had academic initiatives to get their products in the hands of students, to make them essentially devotees of their products. I mean, the days of Apple, where Apple would give away their tech to schools. Very, very philanthropic, but also, of course, it makes those students become devotees of that technology. So, the big vendors all have those programs, and Kivuto really grew up serving those programs. So paid by those vendors, we call it vendor managed services, to manage and distribute those software products into schools to create those student devotees that will go on to professional careers and essentially become dividend checks for those software vendors. That's how the Kivuto platform was built. We then added a B2C e-commerce platform where we had negotiated highly discount general pricing for students. That's On the Hub. That's our e-commerce portal. As you said, that serves over 29,000 schools, 183 countries across the world. So a very successful program. It's a general emporium where students can go and get discounted software. Then the third go-to-market business is a SaaS business. And this is where schools have negotiated their own campus agreements for software, but they need technology, to manage and distribute that to the appropriate school, students, staff, faculty within those schools. So those programs have to be managed, right? You have to manage the agreement. You have to manage who's entitled, who's got the copy, how long they keep it. That used to be perpetual license keys. And then, as the world evolved into cloud software, now it's access in and out of cloud portals that we're managing the subscriptions in and out of those cloud portals. So those three go-to-market lines of business. The company beginning of 2018 was purchased through the search fund model. Two searchers found Kivuto and decided to make an acquisition. of Kivuto, and that transaction went down. It was actually a very large transaction. I think at the time, the largest search fund deal that's ever been done, and a typical search fund structure. So, about half risk, half leverage on the deal. So fairly significant amount of leverage in the deal. And unfortunately, very soon after that transaction was completed, one of those vendor managed service programs, it was with Microsoft, was Microsoft decided to bring that in-house. At the time, Microsoft was making a big push to push as much as they could to Azure. They wanted to run as much of their business through Azure. It still to this day is the key buzzword. If you talk to anyone from Microsoft and you want to get their interest, you mention Azure or Azure consumption, and their eyes light up. And so the ink was barely wet on the contract for the searchers to acquire Kivuto, and Microsoft informed them that they were going to be moving that program. And it was a very large program for the company. And so, anyone familiar with the search fund world, the companies are typically acquired on a multiple of EBITDA. And so their whole hypothesis for the acquisition was kind of out the window, and they were thrust into a situation where they were recoiling and having to recover from a significant loss of revenue and EBITDA, and their investment thesis to grow the company was really out the window. And so, the searchers continued to do that for a short period of time, a couple of years, but really it was very, very difficult. The company had basically been acquired where it was overpaid, over-levered. You have a great company basically in a situation where it was sitting on too much debt and servicing too much debt. So at that point in time, the searchers actually parted ways with the company. And there was a hiatus period of about 6 months. I had been brought onto the board to try and help the searchers deal with the situation. And the board was twisting my arm to take over as the CEO and try and get out of this hole that the company had kind of found itself in. And so I reluctantly agreed to do that starting in February of 2020. And, my mission was pretty clear. You've got this company that's built an incredible brand, a great reputation, and 3 lines of business. The legacy vendor managed service business was clearly under significant threat and declining, and that was the lion's share of the revenue. So we knew that was going to continue to decline and go away over time. The B2C e-commerce business was fairly stable. We could look to potentially grow that, but it was never going to grow at a massive rate. And the most exciting part of the business was the SaaS, B2B SaaS part of the business, where schools use the platform to manage their own campus agreements. We felt that part of the business was the most attractive. It could drive the most value to the business and make the business, frankly, look really attractive. So my mission was to go in and really focus on driving those parts of the business that could really drive the value. It was clearly still not a best practice software company, even though it had been around a long time. There was a lot of work to do to turn it into a best practice software company. Employee morale, as you can imagine, at that point was pretty low because there'd been a couple of years of struggling, knowing the company had a capital stack problem, a massive amount of debt that it really couldn't service with the existing business. When I took over, we ran an employee NPS survey, and I think we were -2. So pretty bad employee morale at the time. So I had to fix that and ultimately get the company to a point where the company looked attractive enough to complete a transaction where we could resolve that capital stack challenge. I mean, that was really my mission. We did a fantastic job. I hired a fantastic executive team. I had a VP of engineering, a CFO, and a VP of sales, of marketing that came on board, signed up for the challenge to turn this company around and get to an exit. Just brilliant co-executives that supported me through the journey. I had a very supportive board of stakeholders. They knew the situation we were in. So everybody was on board with the mission, and we did a fantastic job through 2020 into 2021 of really turning the company into a best practice software company. We really did that. We really focused on the SaaS business and were able to grow that actually quite substantially. Not enough to dig our way out of the debt hole that we were in, but really, if you just looked in isolation at that SaaS business, it made the company look extremely attractive. So we got to a good place. This was, I think, the beginning of 2022. The market in general, if you remember that period, had been extremely hot. Valuations were kind of through the roof, but you could see the market turning. You could see the market turning at that point. It was a lot of talk about interest rates rising. They hadn't happened at that moment. So I knew and my executive team knew, and I got support of the board, we knew that that was the time to go to market. We had really cleaned up the company. EdTech's actually remained pretty hot even after the market started to turn. So we got sort of an early, but the question is, how do you sell a company when you already know that the likely outcome, the proceeds from the outcome likely will be less than the invested capital and debt of the company? So what do you do? How do you do that? So the first approach we tried with the support of our senior lender and our sub debt, top of the stack, top of the waterfall, right? We had to have their support, was to try to execute what's called a pre-deal plan of compromise. And that's essentially where you throw your waterfall out the door. Not easy to do that. And you establish, a new allocation of proceeds that will happen where the debt providers get an allocation, the equity gets an allocation, the management team gets an allocation. But it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And as I learned through that process, our capital stack, the waterfall, we had our senior lender at the top, a very large bank in Canada. You can kind of guess who that is. It's the biggest bank in Canada. So they were sitting at the top of the pile. We had a sub-debt provider. It was also kind of a large debt position, and most of that debt was PIK'd. So it was actually growing. And so actually our overall debt position was growing, which made it even more stressful. But they sat at the top, and then we had our, traditional Class A, Class B preferred under a search fund deal, and then the common beneath that. So a typical waterfall. So the idea was to throw that out the window, no priority, and then come up with this new pre-deal plan of compromise. The problem is when you try and do something like that, it's very difficult for creditors, for the leverage, the debt providers to act any way other than being a debt provider. And it's not just the situation you're in, it's also their perception in the marketplace. And a pre-deal plan of compromise, if they were to, give in their position in the waterfall for one small company, what message does that send to the broader market? So, frankly, we wasted a few months trying to get that agreement. It looked like we almost pulled it off, but at the kind of the 11th hour, senior lender said, no, we really can't do this. We need to just stick to the waterfall. And I think there was some excitement because we had 3 investment bankers all chomping at the bit to take us to market. We did look very attractive at the time. Market was still hot. So unfortunately, I couldn't pull off the pre-deal plan of compromise, back to the drawing board. And at that point, the market had changed, right? So about 4 or 5 months had gone by and valuations were definitely declining. The market was nowhere near as hot. And so we were kind of, aggressively needed to get to market, and because, we wanted to maximize the outcome for the stakeholders. And so the good news is we found a process, pretty creative process, which is called an approval investing order. It's actually something that's very popular in Canada in the cannabis industry. And the idea under that structure is that you basically retain the parts of a company you want to keep, so the assets that are valuable and you want to keep, and then you vest off liabilities. So in the cannabis industry, in the early days, a lot of companies had been founded by the original founders of those companies who were basically doing things illegally, illegal operations. Suddenly it was all legalized. And so you had people who had, great skills at growing cannabis, maybe not the greatest business people in the world, but very valuable licenses were granted to run those businesses. So as those businesses sort of lost their way, but you had this valuable license and new investors wanted to come in and maybe carry forward because of the great opportunities in the cannabis industry, this technique of a reverse vesting order or an approval investing order was used, where you could kind of throw off liabilities but retain the really valuable parts of the company. So I think safe to say that when we completed our transaction with Valsoft, we used an AVO process. I think we're one of the first non-cannabis industry companies to ever do that. And so the great news for Kivuto is we were able to vest off the debt liability. And then essentially it was like a mini pre-deal plan of compromise where under leveraging a court order, we were able to then distribute the proceeds according to that approval investing order that was executed. And Valsoft ended up being the acquiring entity. It was a good transaction. I think at the end of the day, I wouldn't say anyone was thrilled with the financial outcome because, as I said, it was one of the largest search fund deals ever done. A lot of money invested, both on the debt side and the equity side into the company. But I think the fact that we were able to keep the company going, get it to a good landing place, and save most of the employees' jobs, and was really a great outcome. And so long answer to the question of what am I proud of. I mean, just an incredibly difficult thing to get through from start to finish. And by the way, I didn't mention that that includes the period where essentially our install base, our customer base, basically shut down for a large period of that time. So we had that to deal with as well, and a number of other really significant challenges that we had to work through. So to get it to a place where the company now lives on, and it's a brilliant company that serves a very important purpose inside of the academic industry, the fact that it lives on today and is now thriving under the Valsoft is brilliant.
What an incredible journey. You were brought in to navigate some choppy waters in a market that was evolving every day, every week. You built up a great team to support you. You were evaluating all of the different options, and it takes real vision to come up with a creative structure like that and be able to pull it off. One of the earliest non-cannabis transactions of this nature in Canada. An absolutely fascinating story, and so many different things to be proud of in there.
Yeah, and a couple of things, I guess, again, stepping back and kind of some big lessons learned, right, and takeaways. I know a lot of the audience probably listening to this will be searchers and part of the search fund world. One of the things that I've taken away from this, I wasn't involved in the original Kivuto search fund transaction and didn't fully understand or ever get visibility into the full details of that went down. But having now experienced the outcome of that and come out the other side and the challenge that it presented, a couple of key lessons learned for me pre-transaction, if you're in a search. One is, obviously, the beauty of the search fund world is we do incredibly thorough due diligence. But even with the most thorough diligence in the world, you'll probably uncover the known knowns and the known unknowns. It's the unknown unknowns that ultimately get you. And, I'm involved with a lot of search fund companies pre and post transaction, and there are always unknown unknowns that come up. Always, no matter how good your diligence was. So obviously do the best diligence you can, right? You look for things like concentration risk. You look for things like technology risk if it's a software company. But it's very important on the deal structure to make sure that you give yourself some wiggle room post-transaction, that should those unknowns come up, that you have some wiggle room to deal with them. And so that the deal structure is incredibly important. So having things like holdbacks, earnouts, seller financing that has conditions that if things aren't playing out as were portrayed pre-transaction, then you have some ability, because the worst thing you want to do is be in a situation where you've either overpaid or over-levered the company, or maybe both. It just throws the whole deal off. So I think that's an incredibly important lesson learned, the deal structure. Post-transaction, the other big lesson learned, I'd say, for Kivuto is, if you're in that CEO role or in a senior leadership position, it's incredible. You have to have blinkers on as a CEO, right? You have to have the ability to, no matter what the challenge is, you have to have the ability to sort of power through and stay positive and see that light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how small it is, to be able to drive through. Kivuto faced every challenge you could possibly imagine, and theoretically should be a dead company at this point. It really should be, given the challenges we had. But the team that came on board, the executive team, the support we had from our stakeholders, very supportive. All the board members, very supportive. We all knew the situation we were in. And by everybody rowing together and really just sticking to it, the ability to get through even, what appeared to be insurmountable challenges was incredible.
Hi, it's Austin, your host, with a brief interruption. Since this podcast is free and not supported by ads, I have a very quick ask for you. If you're finding value in this conversation, please consider sharing it with another leader or aspiring leader who you think would enjoy it, so that we can learn and lead better together. And if you're a software founder considering a successful exit to a partner who will love your team just as much as you do, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email at austin@magrathiapartners.com. That's Austin@Magrathea, Magrathea, magrathiapartners.com. Thanks, and now back to the show. So many things to be proud of there in terms of overcoming challenges. I would be curious, Mark, to hear about a story of customer success that you're very proud of from your time at Kivuto too.
Yeah, good question. I'd go back to the approval investing order process, right? The fact that what we were doing was fairly unique, a little odd, certainly not familiar to even our stakeholders, right? The investment banker we ultimately signed up on board was not familiar with that structure and that process. So getting everyone through that to understand it. And then when the actual transaction happened, that process requires a whole bunch of communication that goes out to all the stakeholders. So your investors, certainly, but all your customers, all your partners. And we have thousands of customers and partners at Kivuto had to receive, some fairly scary legal documents that, as you're going through that approval investing order court process, they have to receive them. And you can't warn them. You can't do the normal soft pedaling around it, the kind of customer account management that you'd want to do. We went through that. And of course, we got bombarded with questions and concerns from customers and partners. It was a really intense period of following up and just making sure everyone understood. And we explained the process we were going through and that we were getting to a good place with Valsoft. The thing I'm most proud of is we didn't lose a single customer through that process. It's partly a testament to the work we did and the stakeholders that were involved in getting through that approval investing order, but also the fact that Kivuto has a great product. One of the things we hear all the time is feedback from our customers about how great the Kivuto team is and the support and customer service we provide. So to go through a kind of a harrowing process like that, suddenly have customers who are depending on our products to get these legal notices. The fact that we didn't lose a single customer is incredible. And, definitely proud of what we did there and the Kivuto team getting through that.
That is incredible. A harrowing process and not a single loss. And so, Mark, there's this notoriously long sales cycle in EdTech. And you've been around the space for quite a while. What would be your best advice for sales in EdTech, given this long sales cycle and how challenging it can be?
Yeah, sales and marketing, I would kind of fold those together. Well, assuming you have a product that solves a real problem for your customers, I think any sales team will tell you, right? I need to know that I'm solving a real pain point for a customer, a real problem for a customer, and I have a product that, at least at a minimum, is viable in solving that pain point. So assuming you have that and you've got that right, so you have something that the marketing team can put out there in the marketplace and the sales team can then go sell. I think it's incredibly important to have all the appropriate sales and marketing hygiene and structure and process in place. So it sounds obvious, but a lot of companies don't have that. So it starts with, from a marketing perspective, right, making sure that you are at the top of your funnel, creating the right volume of marketing qualified leads that come in to that top of that sales funnel so that the sales team's going to have enough coming in for them to feed on, right? How does the marketing team do that? Well, I personally like the pragmatic marketing framework. There's a lot of boxes in there. If you look at both inbound and outbound marketing, there's a lot of key things that you need to be doing and make sure you're doing, or at least have thought through as a company that you're doing. Marketing's not just about outbound. It's a lot of other stuff. It's about creating sales collateral, making sure the sales team is trained and aware of how to position the product in the marketplace. It's competitive analysis. It's pricing. It's a lot of things. So you've got to get all those things right from a marketing perspective, and then make sure that then leads to opportunity development, lead generation coming in at the top, and it's quality, right? It's marketing qualified leads, so that as that flips over into your sales team, the sales team's going to accept those sales accepted leads, we call them, at the top of the funnel. That hygiene on the sales side is really about then understanding what your deal stages are, having real clarity around that. What are the different stages we're going to go through to move a customer from being unaware of the product all the way to making a purchasing decision? What are those stages? How long will we spend in each of those stages? What are the typical conversion ratios? When you have a deal in a certain stage above in the sales funnel, how many of those will convert to the next stage down? You need to understand those ratios. And the whole idea is that you're getting to a point where in any given quarter, your sales team can actually produce a quarterly bookings result that they can stand behind. And they're going to tell you what that's going to be ahead of time. And then as the quarter proceeds, right, you've got active ongoing forecasting. I like the whole 1 week, 1 month, 1 quarter view. So that at all times your sales team is telling you, here's where we're going to land. And the whole idea is to get to a point where you're very prescriptive at producing a quarterly bookings result. It's always nice to get more, but actually I like to be on target, because sometimes, overachieving on bookings is problematic too, because maybe the rest of the organization isn't aligned or structured or has the capacity to deal with more business versus less. So the idea is to get that predictability. So having that whole structure, having a really good CRM solution is important. Oh, and then if you think about EdTech, Ed is very seasonal, right? You have your September back to school, you have a January back to school, early summer back to school. And then during the summer periods, typically when they do their budgeting. So long sales cycle, in no small part because there's an annual budgeting cycle and you kind of have to wait. Schools are kind of like pseudo government organizations, right? They can only spend what is budgeted. So you have to make sure you're catching those cycles. Obviously, having great existing customer references, relationships, and so really taking care of your install base. Very, very important in education. They're a follower crowd, right? You have these consortia in education. There's often lead schools that will kind of lead the way and make those decisions. And once they buy, kind of the rest of the system follows. So incredibly important to have those good references in education, especially. And then from a sales and marketing point, you've got to hire a great sales team, right? Hire and retain a great sales team, and then hold their feet to the fire on the traditional sales metrics, right? Because we want to know that our customer acquisition cost is going to be in line with what we expect, right? That our win-loss ratios are what we expect, right? That if you have inside sales, if you have a BDR function, right, they're doing the right number of outbound calling. And so all those metrics matter, and it all feeds back to that hygiene around the funnel, because I'm trying to make sure at every stage along that funnel, I'm having the right volume in any given quarter so that I can produce that quarterly bookings result. And that obviously feeds into everything, right? It feeds into the financial model of the company. It feeds into what you're telling your board you're going to do, therefore what funding you need to hire new people. So that predictability becomes incredibly important.
So there's a lot of depth there on managing sales and marketing as a function. Certainly two skills that any CEO or leader needs to have is the ability to sell and the ability to manage people. You built up a team and helped them navigate through some challenging waters. Mark, what would be your best advice for managing people?
I've definitely managed a lot of people throughout my career. I think people management is the most important thing, right? A company is the people. We obviously have our product, we have our services, but at the end of the day, the company's going to live and die on the people you have. I mean, I think it starts with hiring great people. You got to have a good recruiting process. And again, that sounds obvious, but a lot of people don't do recruiting well. You have to invest time in that. The best model I ever learned for recruiting was actually the first company I ever worked for. It was called Anderson Consulting back there in the day. Had a very effective and rigorous recruiting practice called critical behavior interviewing, where you would identify the critical success factors that would make someone successful in their role inside the company, and then go through an interview process where you set up scenarios where you can kind of draw out of them where they've either exhibited or not exhibited those critical success factors in their prior role. So I still use a version of that today when I do recruiting. But you have to invest in recruiting, because hiring the wrong people is incredibly expensive, right? The whole process, what it costs to hire, and then onboarding, and then if it doesn't work out, replacing them is very expensive. So I think it starts with, you got to have good people, right, before you get to managing those people. And then I think you have to invest in the people. You have to retain them. So it's really important to mentor, grow, develop people. People want to develop in their careers. And so how do you do that? You have to put a proper performance development plan structure in place. I personally like to link people's performance plans, their development plans, to the goals of the company. So everyone has a very tangible, clear line of sight from what you're asking them to do in their role all the way up to the company's goals and objectives. I like to use today the OKR structure. So we do that at the company level, that rolls down to the department, all the way down to an individual's objective and what key performance indicators and what results you expect that you're going to measure those people against in their individual performance. That takes work. That takes effort. That's not easy to do. But if you do that and you do it well, it's very tangible. That job satisfaction is very tangible for people. You need to understand their career goals. You need to understand how they want to develop. It's not just about dictating, here's what I expect for you from a performance, but it's then how's that going to help me evolve in my career? And in some cases, don't be afraid to move people around. Kivuto had this interesting practice in Canada where new immigrants to Canada would often find a role at Kivuto as a first job. And very often these people would have qualifications way beyond the role. They would typically come into our support team. They were doing customer support, which is a great way to learn the product, but we'd find that we'd have a lawyer or we'd have an accountant doing customer support. And those people became very obvious candidates to move into other roles inside the company. So, don't be afraid to move people around. The back end of it is sometimes you have to let go of people. Sometimes even though you've hired great people and you're really developing them and you're helping nurture them in their roles, sometimes you've got to fire people. You've got to restructure. That could be because, people have the wrong skills or they're not the right fit for the company. It could be because of poor performance. It could be because they're toxic, right? They're toxic to the environment in some way, shape, or form. Or it could be because you have a financial challenge and you have to do a restructuring. I had to do one of those as soon as I took over as the CEO. It's painful. I had to restructure because I knew we had a huge financial challenge with our capital stack. Assuming you now have the right people in the right role, managing people to me comes down to really there's two styles for me. Style number one, which I don't like, and I see it pervasively used, is what I call fear-based leadership. More of a dictator, right? More of a, you will do this, and if you don't, here's the consequences. And I see that a lot in the business world, and I've never liked it. It's never been my style. I like non-fear-based. I like inclusion. I like open communication. I like rolling up my own sleeves and getting involved and showing that I'm not asking you to do anything that I wouldn't be willing to do myself. Lead by example. Anyone who believes in any business or any situation that they have all the answers is fooling themselves. People have great ideas. There are no bad ideas. You need to encourage that, allow that inclusion. I'm an over communicator and it sometimes gets me in trouble, but my philosophy is if I communicate 10 times, 9 out of 10, it's provided incredible value and driven productivity. And then maybe 1 time out of 10, I revealed something I probably shouldn't have done. But I feel like the 9 out of 10 is worth the 1 out of 10 that it costs me. And yeah, so that's my style. It's like, don't lead through fear. Lead by example and by inclusion and open communication and bringing people in. At Kivuto, I was very clear when I took over, the challenge we had in front of us to the team. And I asked the team to come on board with that challenge. I didn't put rose-colored spectacles on and say everything's great. No, we used OKRs, right, to set our planning. And then we used the balanced scorecard to basically constantly report out to people where we stood in that mission and that journey to get the company to a point where we could move it to a new place, resolve the capital stack challenge, remove the debt so the company could thrive. Everybody was fully aware of that mission. And so, yeah, that's my style. I think that's how you should manage people.
Well, that's a fantastic segue to my next question. So you're leading by example, you're leading through inclusion, you're rolling up your own sleeves. And Mark, you're at the point in your career now where you're regularly coaching young entrepreneurs, mentoring them, helping them scale the companies that they've acquired or that they're running. I'd be curious, could you share with us a story about working with one of these young entrepreneurs that's brought you joy?
Yeah, I'd probably give more of a general answer. I've been fortunate. I've had a really great career. A big part of that is working with some amazing people who've worked for me or with me, alongside me. And my style has always been to be as giving as I can in mentoring and growing and sharing and showing, hey, here's my style, here's how I do things. When I think back over the career and I look at the people I've worked with or who worked for me, there's an enormous amount of people who've gone on to great success. And so either I just got lucky or maybe some of it rubbed off. And, people that have started companies and founded those companies and sold those companies, people who are in very senior executive roles in businesses. I've just got a really nice network of that throughout my career. I've been working in and around the search fund world now for about 15 to 20 years. My good friends that founded Relay Investments, good friends of mine from undergrad actually in London, Martin and Sandro, were leveraging my skills on a pro bono basis in the early days to look at software deals, right? I think the search fund world really didn't start off being focused on tech. I know it's very popular now with the search fund world, but in the beginning it wasn't. So when tech deals came along, Martin and Sandro would kind of send them my way and ask me to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's kind of how it started for me. And then as time has evolved, really back in, I think it was 2017, where I started to get more heavily involved, became an operating partner at Relay, being more involved pre-transaction with the searchers, and then being invited to boards, people recognizing that I had kind of deep experience in tech and software, being asked to act in an advisory role to some of the searchers post-transactions. And in the last 15 years, I've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing searchers who've completed their transactions and gone on to run the companies, some exits and some ongoing search deals now that I'm involved with. As you know, the way the search fund world, those individuals are very often very smart. Being able to work alongside those individuals, and I work with some awesome CEOs, has been incredibly rewarding, and to see them grow. So in the case of one CEO I can think of who had never had a direct report prior to taking over the company, to see that person flourish now. I'm fortunate that all my portfolio companies today are doing extremely well, growing. That gives a great deal of satisfaction, actually, seeing them evolve and turn into the great business leaders that they've become.
Another fantastic segue, Mark. Thank you for perfectly lining up my next question, which is, as you work with these young entrepreneurs and leaders, what would be your best advice for people just starting off in their own leadership journeys?
Yeah, they'll focus on the senior leadership. You know, if your aspiration, and certainly it is in the search fund world, right, is to be a CEO or a COO, leader of a company, it's a brilliant role. There's no doubt. The allure of being the person at the top of the pile, leading the charge, it is a brilliant role. But I would say it's not for everyone. It is an incredibly difficult role, right? I like to say, all roads lead to the CEO. So whether that's, from the top down, all your stakeholders, whether that's the board, the investors, if they have an issue, they have a problem, they have a question, guess who they're coming to? They're coming to you. And then below you, kind of feeding into you, you've got your team, right? And so, all roads lead to you again as the CEO. And it very much is a 7x24 role. You can never switch it off. You really feel that accountability. And so you're going to be living it during the day, and you're going to be dreaming about it at night when you're asleep. And then the next day it starts all over again, and it never ends. It's an incredibly rewarding role, but it's very stressful. And so when you sign up to do that, make sure you have your eyes wide open. You know what you're signing up for. And you're not just signing yourself up, you're signing your family, right? Your partner, your family, you're signing everyone up, because it is going to be 7x24. I think it's important that you have your eyes wide open when you go into that situation.
Great advice for everybody just starting off and aspiring to leadership as a CEO. Mark, is there a question that I should have asked that I haven't asked yet?
Wow, yeah, that's a good one. Maybe the question I would ask is, what's the greatest or most powerful thing you've ever learned in your career?
I think I might have to make that a regular question on the podcast. That's a great one. I would love to hear your insight into that question, Mark.
I've thought about this a lot recently. I'm getting longer in the tooth in my career. It's interesting. I've been fortunate enough to be educated in some of the greatest educational institutions in the world. Imperial College London as my undergrad, Haas Berkeley for my business executive education. And I've just been fortunate enough to learn at some of the greatest institutions. But the greatest thing I ever learned really didn't come from that. And so I'd say it's understanding that at all times, whether it's a customer, a partner, an employee, in business, when you're communicating, everyone is only ever listening to themselves. Why that's powerful is the way in which we think about the world and the way that humans work is 180 degrees opposite to that. We think that we're always listening. And, there's a lot of theories about being a great listener and how you listen to someone else. Well, the reality is When you think of the biology and physics of listening, no human in the whole history of humankind's ever listened to another human being. It's not how it works. The way it works is, I talk, air molecules oscillate, hits your eardrum, and an electrical impulse goes into your brain where you interpret that based on all your prior ontological experience, right? All the engrams that have hit your brain from the day you were born to now, where you interpret that. And that's all you do. That's all you do all the time. And so, if everyone is only ever listening to themselves, but we think that it's the opposite, I think that's where a lot of challenge comes into place. So it doesn't matter if you're trying to sell to a customer, you're trying to pitch. The thing is, when you pitch to the customer, you're triggering their background listening to listen to themselves. So it's incredibly important that your message resonates with how they listen to themselves. If you're working through an issue with a partner and you're butting heads and you're not going anywhere, it's not because they're not listening to you. It's because that they're not listening to themselves in the way you want them to listen to themselves to accept your idea. It's literally 180-degree opposite. It's a little painful to operate this way, but that's how the world really works. And I think to be effective in business, whether it's with your customers, your partners, your employees, your stakeholders, I think always sort of having that filter in your brain. I did a meditation course way back when. It's made famous by Jack Dorsey, the Vipassana meditation, which is sort of based on the original teachings of Buddha, right? If you go back, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha from 2,500 years ago, who kind of discovered this the root of all human suffering is because we overly crave or overly fear things. That if you can just observe yourself, right? Observe inside yourself when you're stimulated, that you cognize first and then you recognize and then you react, right? If you can put a filter between recognize and react, so you have some equanimity and you really think about, why am I reacting that way? Well, typically you're reacting that way because of you're listening to yourself, right? And you're listening to yourself based on your prior programming. That reaction you're about to have may not be the right reaction to win the deal or resolve the issue. It's really the opposite. So you have to kind of put that filter in place and understand that everyone is only ever listening to themselves. Most powerful thing I ever learned.
Unexpectedly fun, a diversion into some philosophy of communication, a little bit of Buddhism, introspection, self-reflection, a fantastic and unexpected twist for the episode. Thanks for sharing that, Mark.
You're welcome.
So the title of our podcast, as you know, is the Leadership and Legacy Podcast. So we always love to close on the topic of legacy. And I would love to hear, Mark, what does legacy look like for you?
Legacy. Well, if I was to answer this question maybe 10, 20 years ago, I think I'd probably give you the stock answer, right? Which is to go on and be incredibly successful and make a ton of money and impact the world and, have my name chiseled on above the library at the local university. That's probably how I would answer it, 10, 20 years ago. But I think today how I would answer that question is maybe the focus should be less upon, trying to produce a great legacy, but really just be a good person. So, being known as someone who is a good person. And for me, if you do that, if you focus on the inside and you do the right things, you care about people, you care about the people around you and mentoring those people, and you make sure that the work you're doing is, again, I go back to the Vipassana meditation. One of the things they talk about there is right livelihood, right action, right speech. So what does that mean? Right livelihood. Well, I felt really great at Kivuto because we have a product and a service that helps students get the right content at the right time in their curriculum to deliver the best learning experience. So I feel good about what we do. I feel like that is right livelihood. We're not an expensive solution. We don't overcharge our customers. And we provide an incredibly valuable service that helps people get access. So often, people that are less fortunate or don't have access to substantial economic resources get access to education materials. So I feel good about that. I feel like that's right livelihood. The past is the past. What's happened in the past is gone. You can't change that. The future will be a product of, your karma. What you do today will produce your future. So if you're taking care of what you do today, and if you're a good person, I think the legacy takes care of itself.
Absolutely fabulous. This has been an incredibly fun and wide-ranging conversation with some fascinating and unexpected twists that I didn't know were coming. So this really has been a pleasure for me.
I did promise you some of those.
You did, and certainly you delivered. Mark, I couldn't imagine a better or more inspiring place to close out the episode. This was highly educational for me. I know that our audience is going to find education not only on the business side, but also some great call to introspection and to living like a better person. So thank you so much for making time to share your journey with us about how you've navigated through some challenges, how you continue to build team, how you think as a manager in business, and also just how you think about navigating through the world personally and being a good person. This is the perfect message to kick off 2024. Thank you so much for your time today.